And we are live. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. I am one of your co-hosts, Blake Ruffino. Alongside me is my counterpart and co-host, Joe DeLeone. Good evening, good sir. How are you?
Blake, it's amazing how after this offseason, or during this offseason, we all talked about this 1 week, week 7. And we got the precursor that we had yesterday. And we're already here. We're already at week 7. We're at the halfway point of the season. This is the make or break week of the year. I don't know about you, but I'm extremely juiced up for this weekend.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's a make or break weekend because here's why. Because if Oregon loses or Ohio State loses, it's not over. Like I've seen a lot of people around Alabama overreacting this today about, oh no, we lost to Vandy. The season's over with. The season's over.
We said yesterday that's not the case.
It's not the case. But, however, boy, do we got some games this week. Florida goes up to Tennessee. Tennessee coming off an upset. You might want to stick around on Ruffino and Joe show if you're a Florida fan this week. Joe, I'm feeling a little bit frisky. Tennessee fans hate me right now because I said Nico might, because of my Nico thing last night. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
However, not the only game, or not the games we'll be talking about today. Ohio State goes and tests the Oregon prowess of the Big Ten. This is a conference game nonetheless. Here we go.
I don't understand what we did to Ohio State fans. We just haven't talked about you guys because you haven't played anybody. I don't all these comments. We got Alex already. He's the first person in the chat saying I'm going to pick Oregon. Here's a spoiler. I'm picking Ohio State, and I'm going to be very confident in that pick. That's coming. But I don't know. I don't understand why Ohio State fans think we hate them. It's very strange.
Yeah. I mean, look, I went back and watched today. I'm going to have a pretty hot take that you are not going to agree with about Ohio State.
No. Okay. Wait, is it positive or negative?
I think it's positive for Ohio State. I don't think that you will like what I'm going to say.
Okay. All right. I'm curious. We'll save it for the segment.
I will save it for the segment, but Ohio State goes out to Oregon. Look, man, what Oregon team's going to show up is going to be the question. Ole Miss goes down to Baton Rouge. I'll be there at this one.
You're going to the game?
I'll be there Friday. I'm not going to the game. I don't ever go to games. People, y'all, they ruined it for me. But I'm just going to say this. The vibe already right now, program-defining game for Brian Kelly going into year 3, Ole Miss coming into town.
Well, so when I said make or break, this one is 1,000% make or break for both of these teams, for both of them. Ole Miss needs this win because they need a ranked victory. They need to bolster their resume. 2 losses this early on in the year at the halfway point could derail completely takes them out of the SEC championship conversation.
Well, and they got Georgia and Texas looking right behind them. So
and then inversely, LSU, for them to have 2 losses and one of them not even being on their SEC schedule, that is going to be tough for them to recover from, and also could bounce them from the playoff conversation. So both of these teams, if they want to make the playoff, for anyone who loves to bring up, it doesn't matter if you lose games and you can still get in, that's not the case for matchups like this one.
Well, look, and there comes a part where Brian Kelly's got to take on two of his former DCs, Mike Elko, in this 3-game stretch. But can LSU beat the likes of Ole Miss, which I think is going to be a chaotic game? The SEC came out today with the game against Arkansas is going to be at night. Taylor Green out with an MCL sprain. So, how does Arkansas look now? Maybe that does save Sam Pittman that game that we were talking about last night if Taylor Green is out and he can come back in for next year. And then the Aggies who beat Mizzou. So, look, we'll talk about that one too, but a big one for sure. And the last game we're going to talk about here tonight, unless we get to Colorado and Kansas State, Joe, I know that we all call it the Red River Shootout. This week and this season, I'm calling it the Red River Blowout.
Oh no, you think it's going to be that lopsided? You're not even giving Oklahoma a shot.
No, I actually don't. But I think a lot of people going into this game think that because we've seen Texas versus what looks to be like a very bad Oklahoma team, that Texas is going to walk into Dallas and really handle business.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I do think that that's going to happen. I really do. I think that this Texas team.
Every time you say that,
I know the blowout doesn't happen. Yeah, so I need to be a little bit more careful. Apparently,
pick LSU to lose.
Well, no. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about the game pick itself. It matters. It's every time I declare a game is going to be a blowout, it ends up being an upset. Except I did get the Vanderbilt thought correct regardless. But no, talk about make or break. Texas, less for them if they lose it, but for Oklahoma's sake, that probably completely erases them from any rankable conversation and definitely the playoff conversation if they get smoked.
I mean, look, how healthy is Quinn Ewers? Who's going to be their quarterback? I would expect it to be him, part of the way that Steve Sarkisian is talking. But, Joe, how healthy is he? Does he trust taking a hit? I mean, against what has been a decent defense, Joe, they've kind of been lackluster at times. I think a lot of that's got to do with the simple fact that their offense can't stay on the field and they're really winded and they're really testing their depth. But I look at this, man, they're just so bad on offense. And they've been bad on offense. Even going into Auburn after a quarterback change, that didn't do much. Joe, they're still 121st in the country in total offense. I mean,
more specifically, their offensive line has been abysmal on a week-to-week basis. And
this isn't the team to get right. Sorry to interrupt you, but this isn't the team to get yourself right in either.
100%.
Right? I mean, they got Hill and they got Colin Simmons. I mean, might be the Red River blowout, not the Red River shootout. So we'll see. All right. We got lots to get into. Let's get into it. Everybody do us a favor by hitting the like and share. If you're on Facebook, share to all those groups and social media pages. If you're watching us on YouTube, Joe, we're closing in on 10K. If you haven't done so already, hit the like button, subscribe button, notification bell, so much content, just in case you miss a live show that you can go over to one of our videos and check it out if you'd like. Please do us a favor. It's all we ask is go to YouTube and subscribe. Also, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can rate, review, and subscribe there as well. We greatly appreciate it. All right, Joe, let's do this. Let's talk about our good friends over at betonline.ag. When we come back, we break down the 3 premier games in Week 7. Stay with us. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way for you to wager on all of your favorite sports, contests, events with the first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews for all the news for each league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, college sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports information for live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head on over to BetOnline today and use your mobile device to join and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50, that's BELIEVE50, BLEAV 50, to receive your 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's betonline.ag, betonline.ag. So is Quinn Ewers, ironically, potentially this week. We'll get to that game in just a quick moment. But, Joe, the premier matchup of the weekend, Ohio State versus Oregon. I think a lot of people, Joe, want to know, is Oregon legit and is Ohio State legit? Look, Ohio State has a very good foundation of guys that they have recruited through high school, and they've built through that. Jeremiah Smith is obviously the one that you can look at and say that about. But, Joe, they also added some really talented pieces. Look, this is what I was going to tell you earlier that I thought that you were going to really get on me about. Will Howard has been really good, man.
I completely disagree with that statement. You're 100% right. I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that he's been really good?
I think that the way that he played against Iowa was kind of indicative of the fact that of what I said in the offseason is very true. I mean, how many times did he throw to covered? I don't mean to cut you off already, but how many times did he throw to covered receivers? He threw an interception in this game.
Joe Burrow in 2019 when they went
off. He's not Joe Burrow.
Okay, but if you have a freak of nature, a man-on-man coverage like Jeremiah Smith, they're always open. Joe, I mean, I'm not trying to be rude with you, but you compared an Iowa defense last week to being a really solid defense that was going to test them at moments. Okay, well, if that's true, he went 21 of 25 for 209 yards. He scored 5 total touchdowns, 4 through the air. I mean, like, he went off. Like, what are we discussing about? Like, he looked I get what you're saying. Yeah, he's throwing it to cover receivers. Jeremiah Smith is a freak show.
Okay. Look, this is my whole thing with Will Howard. And the whole thing that I said during the offseason, by the way, Ohio State fans, before you get mad at me, I have a whole spiel on why I think pretty confidently that you're going to win. But my whole thing with him is that he wasn't an upgrade over Kyle McCord. And Kyle McCord's playing great football for Syracuse right now. And you've got a guy who, again, he is throwing
receivers, bud.
He has weaker receivers. Kyle McCord now has weaker receivers at Syracuse, and he's putting up great production. He willed his team back against UNLV. He 100% deserves the credit that he is against UNLV. He's playing great football. Will Howard, on the other hand, again, I'm watching him throw to covered receivers. He's throwing into tight coverage. Because of the guys that he's throwing to, he's able to get bailed out 100% of the time. I'm not saying that he's horrible. I'm not saying that he's bad. That's not what I'm saying. But it goes back to my whole take this whole offseason. I think Will Howard is slightly above average. And if you listen to anybody else talk on any other shows, they've said mostly the same thing.
I don't care what they say because I can defend the point that there's
I watched the all 22. I watched the tape. I think he is fine. I think he makes some good decisions. He's a big, strong athlete. They use him, incorporate him great in the run game.
What do you think of Iowa's defense?
I think that it's good, but I don't think that look, I said that it was one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. It was a good defense. It was going to be a good barometer for how good Will Howard is.
Okay, well then how are you going to come out here the next week when the guy had 5 total touchdowns and say that he didn't make some elite? I could also make the argument that the coverage that you're talking about is an elite throw by him that he's put it in a place that nobody else can catch it. But his receiver that he knows he's a freak. See, this is what y'all do. And
no. Okay,
I'm going to be real with you. This is why I think that they're going to go into Oregon and win. I've seen him in tight coverage make the throws and trust the receiver when they're there.
I'm referring to the fact, and look, he had 21. He was 21 for 25 in this game. He does have a lot of open receivers that he connects to. I just don't love some of the decisions that he makes, and the interception that he threw was pretty brutal. And now I want to move on to talking about why I think Ohio State is going. I want to move on to talk about why I think that Ohio State is going to win this football game. I feel very confident in the skill players that Ohio State has. Like, extremely confident. More importantly, I feel very, very confident in how good Ohio State's defense is. Tyleik Williams, that whole front seven, has been eating up everybody that they've gone against, and they were all over Iowa's offense. And I know that it's an Iowa offense. If you want to downplay it, they still kicked the crap out of that Iowa offensive line. They are so good on defense. They are statistically one of the best in the country in sacks produced, tackles for loss produced. They are so good. And my whole thing with Will Howard is that Will Howard doesn't need to be a top 10 quarterback. He doesn't, because there are so many tremendous athletes at receiver, at tight end, at running back. They're able to be diverse in their decision-making and their play calls because of every single guy that they can turn to. So he can go for 209 yards and throw a pick, and they can still win by almost 30 points because of how good this roster is. And I compare that to Oregon right now, who frankly still feels a little bit erratic. Like, I feel like that they are gifted and they've got good athletes, but they're not in a steady pace the same way that Ohio State is. I think there's more of a separation than the outcomes of these games would indicate.
Yeah, and look, it's, we think that Oregon's been tested because they went up against Boise State. They had to kick a field goal there at the end to win. I don't really know if they've necessarily been tested like this either. They haven't gone against a top 10 opponent like some teams have, but neither has Ohio State. And Joe, I got to be real with you. To this point, I think we're going to find out a lot about both teams because Iowa just doesn't have a pulse. I know that they might. They're quality team. No, they're 122nd in the country in total offense. No, they don't have a pulse offensively. Sorry.
They don't have a pulse offensively, but they're a quality team, which is why it's fine to use that Iowa game as evidence for how good Ohio State is all I'm saying.
I'm not going to go that far because this Oregon team has better. I mean, Joe, they don't have. I'm not going to continue to go down that game. That's why we should have just broken it down last night. But I mean, look, Oregon has a big issue in running the football. Again, I understand that last week James went off, but Joe, there have been injuries that they are getting guys back from, and I get that. They're still a 67th in the country in rushing offense against one right now is one of the best front sevens that in the country. Like I think that you just talked about it. Like that D line, that front seven for Ohio State has been more than high caliber. But I don't know if they've been tested. So even though I look at Oregon and say maybe in the early part of the season you had struggles running the football, Joe, I don't know if there's anybody that they've seen yet that maybe that we can compare to. Dillon Gabriel's a serviceable quarterback here. I mean, he's going to put you in right positions. But to your point, they're so erratic. They're so erratic in what they're doing. And I think that this game being at night in Eugene is going to give them an edge. But I feel
it's technically not at night because it's a 7:30 kick. So I don't mean
5:30.
No,
it's 5:30 West Coast. If it's
no,
6:30 or 4:30.
It's 7:30 Eastern time, so it's 4:30. So just to correct you, but just before anyone comments that word.
Okay, well, Pacific people, your time zone's stupid. All right, regardless.
Okay.
In this situation, I agree with you. I think that Ohio State's just going to be too much. I do think that their running game's going to struggle against Ohio State.
That's the biggest point for me is that watching the success that especially the interior pass rush and the interior run defense for Ohio State, the success that they were able to have against Iowa and the success they've had this season. I mean, there's just so many future NFLers on that Ohio State defense. One thing that we've talked about with Oregon, and I know that their offensive line has been slowly improving. I don't know if it's improved enough in the interior for me to feel good coming into this game. Jordan James is a great back. He played great against Michigan State. If they can get him out in space and they can mostly rely on outside runs, maybe they can spark some things. But it is going to be really tough sledding trying to produce in the interior based on what's been put on film so far by Ohio State. I feel pretty confident about this. I feel very, very confident that Ohio State is going to beat Oregon. I'm sure that one's going to get pulled by somebody after I get proven wrong and something crazy happens in this game. But from what I've seen, I see a much more consistent Ohio State team that has so many premier players at their offensive skill positions and then on defense at all the important spots, especially in their front seven.
I have questions about Ohio State. Like, look, Oregon's defense is not a complete pushover either. Now,
no, absolutely not. Their defensive line is not just as good, but is also very, very good.
I mean, the last time that they faced a running game like this, however, Genty went off. I mean, and you have Henderson, you have Quinshon Judkins.
Right.
I'm interested to see how the reverse happens. How does Ohio State run the football against Oregon? And I think that their defense, for what it's worth, can slow Ohio State down enough, okay, to keep them relatively in the game early. But I'm going to throw this out at you from an Oregon perspective. Joe, the last time that we said about a game that we felt might be a little bit more lopsided, why do I keep in the back of my mind remembering that Dillon Gabriel went off against a playoff-led Texas team last year? His ability in big games, when he's been in these situations, he's taken off and he's used his legs. He has overperformed what people think of him as a quarterback. And when you're able to get first down with your legs, which we saw him do against a talented front seven last year in Texas, why does something in the back of my mind say, hey, man, Dillon Gabriel has not been a slouch in these high-profile games either?
Yeah, he's always somebody who's stepped up to the occasion, but I mean, at the same time, in some ways, he's faltered. So for every Texas game, there's also the Oklahoma State game, the Kansas game, where Oklahoma didn't play that great. I know it's not on all on him. I'm not saying he played abysmally, but like he does have some great performances. I also think to talk more about like how Oregon's offense matches up here. One thing that this offense is built and designed on, it's getting playmakers the ball in space and allowing them to create.
Yep, Tez Johnson is the poster child of that.
As much as Dillon Gabriel could have a big game and he could be able to set his guys up for that, one thing that really stood out to me from Ohio State, Blake, was how much they rally and they tackle. They come downhill. They don't allow anything after the catch. Like, I really wonder if that's the separation point. Like, early on in the Iowa game, it felt like there were some early, like, not big gains, but like they were moving the chains like a little bit more than you would have anticipated based on what the final score was. But after so many drives of getting stopped right after they caught the ball or right after guys got past the line of scrimmage, it just grinded them down, and then their offense completely got shut down. So
all right, well,
that's another thing here.
Oh, sorry. Let me be a counter, or let me play devil's advocate, as the old saying goes.
Okay.
Have they faced a receiver core this good?
Well, that's true. I was receiving core is not to the degree of for very wide margin of Oregon. So that's a very strong point.
So, I mean, look, I get what you're saying about their DBs. I look at them, though. Okay, pass defense, they're fourth in the country in total in passing yards allowed. They haven't given up much. I don't think that they face anybody remotely close that can stress them either.
Yes.
So
big find out moment here.
You talk about there being the separation point. And it very well may be. I'm not saying that it's not. Their secondary with Caleb Downs, all those guys, fantastic. You haven't also played a defense that can kind of go somewhat vertical on you too. Like, look, man, Terrence Ferguson had 2 catches, 82 yards last week. He is their explosive playmaker when it comes to get the ball, get downfield, get the ball, get downfield. Tez Johnson had 10 catches last week, Joe, for 84 yards. And I look at him, okay, you better be able to tackle in space, because if you don't, you are in trouble on him, man. That kid is one cut up the field, and he's going to get 7 on you. And before you know it, you're midway through the third quarter, and he's got 7 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. You're like, Jesus Christ. How many times can we tackle this dude? I get what you're saying on that. The thing that's interesting for me with Ohio State, offensively, I think that they're going to be fine. It's the opposite side of the things that there's just nobody that's tested them yet that I can be like, all right, well, everything that we thought about you going into the season in this defense was 100% correct. And this is what I also think too. I think of this in the back of my mind also. What has this season taught us? That everything that we thought about in a position group going into the season, at some point or another, has been proven to be false. Right? Look at how many position groups that we've looked at. Oh, man, Ole Miss and that wide receiver core, they're going to go off. Oh, man, Georgia, year 2 under Carson Beck, they've had a downfall. There have been in these high-profile games, Vandy, over Bama, Arkansas, over Tennessee. I know that's one conference, but all I am saying here is I need to see you also do it too.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but like at the same time, I think we're kind of deep enough into the season now where we have a little bit better of an idea, and kind of all the predetermined notions that we had in the preseason, like they're kind of all tucked away. We're going off of what we've seen halfway point through the season. I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I understand. I'm just elaborating a little bit, but there. But to your point, though, I 100% agree that like this is a real testing point for this Ohio State defense and this secondary, because you're right. They haven't faced anyone this talented yet. They haven't. And Ohio State fans can't sit here and disagree with that, because you've had a Michigan-esque schedule to this point, the Michigan one from last year, where you had a million weeks to warm up, and then you get an Iowa team that doesn't really have much of an offense. So, of course, you're going to blow past them. Still taught us some things. I will say, though, and where I'm giving them credit here, having watched them on film and not just the broadcast, the way that they were tackling and the way that they were coming downfield, the way that they were reacting, to me was extremely, extremely positive. It would at least indicate that they're going to do a good job of that against Oregon. Things could go in the opposite direction, but I at least feel good about that in the demeanor that they were approaching, not allowing any yards after catches.
I'm with you. I understand that, but so is Oregon. Look, here's what I feel. Or this is to wrap my thoughts about this game on Monday in a bow. I think Ohio State may be the best team in the country. If not one, they're 2. But I don't know that if anybody's been able to test them enough for me to come out here and say, hey, all right, now my beliefs of you are true. Because, again, Joe Marshall has the best receiving core, arguably, that they've seen. And I'm like, yeah, that's not what you're going to see Saturday. In reference to Oregon, look, man, when are you not going to be erratic? Now, you weren't necessarily erratic last week, but you played a bad football team. So we'll see.
Well, that's what's. I know there's a couple of super chats, but like to that point, and it's one of these things where, and I said this at the very beginning. I talk about Ohio State or Oregon being erratic. If you looked at the stats and if you just watch the highlights, it's not indicative of that. But like when you go and you watch them play on tape, it just feels really messy. Like it feels like there's just like not a ton of chemistry, and like not everything's like clicking to the degree that you would hope. And it kind of makes sense why they were so slow to start the season. I think that there was one play where Dylan Gabriel rolls out and looks like he's a wide open receiver and he gets picked off. Like plays like that in a goal to go situation. Plays like that kind of play into what we're talking about here. They looked like they blew out Michigan State, but at the same time, when we rewatched the game, it wasn't really as smooth of a blowout as one would have thought. I think there's a lot of things that are going to be exposed for both of these teams, depending on who wins it.
All right, Elks in the super chat with a $2 super chat says, Joe is a Will Howard hater. We know this.
Yeah, okay. So just because I'm critical, actually, I'm not even really being critical of him. I'm just being realistic. Like, he's not a Heisman finalist. He's not going to be a Heisman finalist. He has been a good football player for you. But this whole thing that we had during the offseason where some people were painting him to be a first-round draft pick, to be a Heisman finalist, those things I didn't see. And that's what we've seen at this point. He's played good football. He's also made bad decisions against bad teams and one slightly above average team. We're going to, if he plays really well against Oregon, I'm willing to change my tune. Okay. I'm very willing to change my tune and for my perspective to change on him. But what I've seen so far is reflective of what I saw from him against when he was at Kansas State. He hasn't been as clean as everybody likes to paint him out to be. And again, a lot of people who do shows agree with me on that.
I don't care about what they think because I like there comes a point.
I do if people share the same opinion with me, and I'm evaluating that, and I'm not
you're using them.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
To pad what you're thinking.
If you're the only person if you're the only person saying something, it usually means that you're wrong.
Like Texas A&M beat Mizzou last week when I was telling everybody, and I was one of the only people that picked Texas A&M to win. You mean like that? All I'm saying is that how can a guy against a good defense go out there and get 5 total touchdowns? By the way,
you're acting like he threw for 400 yards and was like unblemished. He had an interception and there's a number
80% passing, bud.
He had 25 passing attempts. You're acting like he had some world beater game. He played a good game, but he also had a pick and he had a couple risky throws that he had that were incompletions and a couple that he were bailed out on.
You take him at Notre Dame and what he's doing right now.
Absolutely, but that's not that has nothing to do with the conversation we're having. No, that has nothing to do. I hate when you do this, that you bring up Notre Dame. It has nothing to do with the conversation that we're having.
I mean, I'm just asking you. All right. He said Howard has 3 interceptions, 75% completion. McCord has 6 interceptions, 67% completion.
McCord's played a harder schedule. I don't want to hear it. Like seriously, like Syracuse has played a harder schedule.
I mean, to your point, they have. Nick does futures with a $5 super chat. Says, Joe, why don't you let Blake get away with saying there's a gap between the top 6 teams last week?
That's a good question. Why did I let you get away with that?
Because I never said it.
Yes, you did. Stop it. You and I got into a huge argument about that last show.
Nope. I have no idea what you're talking about. I will deny I plead the fifth. Thank you, Nick, for the super chat. All right.
Thank you, Nick.
You want to get to the Red River shootout or to LSU Ole Miss?
Let's do Red River first.
Okay. Joe, the first time that the Red River shootout is coming to the SEC, Texas versus Oklahoma. Listen. There are a lot of people that believe that Oklahoma has no chance in this game to beat Texas. They also thought that last year. And look, it's a completely different situation going into this one, in my humble opinion. But when you look at Texas versus Oklahoma and the Cotton Bowl, what do you think?
So, first of all, last year I was one of the few people that gave Oklahoma a chance to win it. That's not the case this year. That's not going to happen. Look, there are a lot of issues, and I'm before any Oklahoma fans think I'm just like ganging up on you and we're beating up on you guys. We said this in the preseason. If this is a 7-5 year in a what is basically a rebuild, your first year in the SEC with a brutal schedule, it's not a bad season. If you lose by 2+ scores to Texas this year, it's not reflective of the future of your program. You need to recruit better at offensive line. And on that note, I think that where the biggest separation point here is, Blake, is that this Oklahoma offensive line has not been good, in that Texas front has been extremely dominant. They kicked ass against what is a pretty steady and typically well-coached Michigan offensive line. We know what they can be. Colin Simmons is playing great as a freshman. Yep. Trey Moore has been a quality player. They are deep like the Tennessee defensive line that we have hyped up a ton. I think that is where things are going to get potentially ugly, that like in the middle of this game, they're just getting after anybody that's trying to create any yards for this Oklahoma offense. One just quick thought to add in here, a stat that kind of supports us. 29th best run defense in the country. They're 24th in team sacks. They're 12th in team tackles for loss. And then the most impressive stat for me, Blake, is they're 8th in third down defense, only allowing 28%, going up against an offense that is been quite hapless at trying to throw the football.
Well, not only hapless, you talk about third down. Oklahoma's 129th in the country in third down. Yeah. Texas, like you mentioned, is 8th in third down defense. Look, Joe, here's the thing. The defense statistically for Oklahoma, you got to throw out every stat because they've been on the field more than anybody. You know, you're getting a dogfight with Tulane. Your defense has to bail you out because you had a really bad was it pick six or fumble six, whatever it was, by Jackson Arnold. You had going into Tennessee, you had a backwards pass. I mean, there's so many different things that the defense has had to bail you out of to keep you in football games. Joe, this offense has not been good. I thought they've looked better with Michael Hawkins because of his ability to run the football and scramble because of how bad that offensive line has been. I will say this. In that offensive line, and if you go look at it, it's normally when one chink in the armor that breaks down. It's not like all four of them are hapless and can't do anything, can't block, can't run block, can't pass pro. Joe, what they're going through and the struggles that they've had have really come from not having the cohesiveness as a 5 unit, okay? It's normally been a chink in the armor of communication in pass pro. It's been a lack of communication in how they're sliding. Got one guy going right, one guy going left, and they're bumping into one another. That cannot continue to happen. Joe, they had multiple situations where the right guard and left guard pulled and ran into one another. They have just not had cohesion. But this is not the week that you find yourself on the offensive line. I don't think it's the week that you find yourself against a Texas team. Now, what I will say is I'm glad that Arch Manning got some real live game reps going into this one. I'm sure Quinn Ewers is going to play this one when they thought that he was coming back. But, Joe, I mean, he's got an ab strain. And if you talk to anybody, I think it's Dr. Chow talked about it when he's on the Believe podcast network a lot. Yeah. He said, listen, you're not going to know how he's going to react until he really takes a hit in those ribs. And really when he takes a hit where he got strained at. So I just don't – this is what I try to do every single time that we come out here. I try to look at a path for each team to win. And the only way that I can see Oklahoma winning is one of two things. Okay, number one is that they just got to force a lot of turnovers and make Quinn Ewers play bad or Arch play bad. Arch makes young quarterback mistakes. They get short fields, and Michael Hawkins can get going, get him in manageable situations. I think that's what they got to do. They got to play keep away, man. You got to hold on to the football, but I don't know how. I really don't know how to hold on to the football. But here's what I would say. When you have a guy that can run and scramble, those guys can keep you in games. Joe, if I'm his coaches this week, I'm saying, listen, if your first two reads are not there, go get us positive yardage. Go try to run around and get us – because, Joe,
to his credit, he actually does a very good job of that. That's actually – I mean, I would argue that's why they got back into the Tennessee game is that –
I agree.
He's not – and some people might criticize me making this statement, but, like, sometimes young guys that are really good athletes tend to immediately trigger to, like, I'm going to run. He did a really good job of that, and that's a good point in this. Like, just if you don't see anything, evade pressure, get out and completely demoralize this defense by getting first downs whenever you can.
I mean, that's their path. They got to I hate using the Michigan analogy because Michael Hawkins is better than Alex Orji or Tuttle or any of those guys. He's more gifted, and we know that. You got to find ways to get big plays. Like if you got one-on-one with Burks on the outside, you got to throw it to him. Now, I know that they've had a lot of injuries and things have been bad, but look, man, positive yardage. I'm telling Michael Hawkins, man, you got to just 2 reads and you're out of there. But, Joe, here's another thing that is not helping him either. They can't run the football. Like they cannot run the football. I look, they're 100th in the country in rushing offense. So it's not like they're giving anything to help this young man either.
And it's brutal for wait, did you say that about Oklahoma or Texas?
Oklahoma, they're 100th in the country in rushing offense.
Yeah, there needs to be some more balance, and I think that to talk on what would be a path for Oklahoma to pull out this upset, because I mean this is 1,000% would be a huge upset. I know that they're both ranked, but this would be a massive upset considering the state of these two programs and the confidence in one being a national title contender and the other figuring out what the heck's going on for the most part. But they would need to, one, benefit from, say, Quinn Ewers isn't as healthy as they would hope, getting as many turnovers as possible. I know that sounds bread and butter, but Oklahoma has been good at doing that. They've been good at generating sacks. They've been good at generating pressures, turnovers. The pick 6 that they had against Peyton Thorne completely revived them in that game when everybody thought that it was over and they were cooked.
Ewers or Arch has not had bad decision making.
Right.
So you can force them into that.
I think that if you're Venables and you're that defensive coaching staff, you need to just send so much pressure. You got to take advantage of the front 7 that you have. You're one of the best teams in team sacks. You're 5th in the country in team sacks so far this year. Go all out. Try and get in the face of Quinn Ewers. And we know that sometimes Quinn Ewers, he has gotten a lot better and he has been improving, but sometimes he makes some boneheaded mistakes when he's got pressure in his face. Leave everything out on the field, which they're absolutely going to do because this is such a huge rivalry for them.
I'm going to ask you this question because I want to give Oklahoma a little bit of credit here before we move on here. Let me ask you this. Texas has had moments where they have been struggling to run the football. I mean, like, look at that Michigan. I mean, like, let me say it like this. USC had more success running the football on Michigan than Texas did. I do wonder if Texas going into this game, like if Oklahoma can just crowd the box, play one-on-one, man-on-man coverage, and just stop them running the football and be effective, how does this affect what they're doing? I don't know how much, but look, it probably doesn't, but you got to take it away. Joe, I mean, again, they couldn't get to a 5-yard carry back against Michigan, who had no pulse on offense. I think Hawkins is a little bit better than that, but look, man, do you have a worry about Texas running the football here?
Admittedly, a little bit, because to what we've talked about so far this season, the injuries that they suffered early on at running back, they haven't played anybody since the Michigan game. Yeah, I wouldn't count Mississippi State as really much of a tough opponent, but I'd love to see if they have any pulse. That really might be something that gets completely taken out of this because Oklahoma's run defense is so tight. It's been so good to this point. I don't think it's enough of a concern that it's going to hurt them, but it's something that needs to be rectified that's going to hurt them down the line for sure.
Well, if they can't, let's think about this, Joe. And I'm not saying that Texas has a soft schedule, but I got to ask us a God's honest question. Is Oklahoma a better team than Michigan? Like, are you going into this game a big-time rivalry game?
I think they're pretty even. I
don't look, I think Jackson Arnold's better than any quarterback that Michigan has. So, like, even the guy that's not starting in this, I think they have more weapons. I think they're more Joe, that it just makes them dangerous just being better at quarterback. So I do wonder if there's some holes. Like, look, man, I'll just say it. And I got roasted about this from Texas fans last year. But what was the big thing that I had against them? Like, hey, man, your secondary is not good. They're blowing coverages. They're making mistakes. Joe, there's not been anybody in their mama that could test them throwing the football. Now, they're second in passing yards allowed. Nobody has been able to test their secondary worth of shit. So I'm not saying Michael Hawkins can, but my God, does he have the ability to be the one that can actually somewhat do it?
Maybe not so much as a passer, but just stress the defense. I keep coming back to this. This Texas secondary is so much better than it was last year, and I think that they continue to get better. This is not going to be the game, though, that they get necessarily tested.
Them.
Nobody has yet, and I don't know what the health situation is for Oklahoma, because we remember going into the Auburn game, they were down like 3-something receivers.
Yeah,
could be. I don't know what the situation is for this game yet, because it's Monday. It's a little too early for that.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. You want to get to Ole Miss and LSU?
Let's do it.
Prime matchup in the SEC this weekend, probably the game of the week in the SEC this weekend, Joe. Before we start off in this, let's just mention the SEC has been a little bit chaotic through the last couple of weeks. Obviously, Bama going down to Vandy, Tennessee getting beat by Arkansas. The SEC, I saw this from our good friend Brooks Austin. I'm going to give him a shout out on this. He said the SEC is Pac-12 in itself. And I thought that was the best tweet that I had seen. Yeah, they really are. But we have this is what I've called it all week. This game is a playoff eliminator. I say all week. I started talking about it yesterday. But
Monday.
Right. But if you're rewatching
Long week already.
I've done 9 radio hits today. 9.
Right.
Okay. I've literally had said this so much, I feel like it's Thursday. I feel like that this game is a playoff eliminator, LSU versus Ole Miss.
It 1,000% is. And I think one of the craziest parts for this game, and this keeps happening to LSU, where they keep coming into these games facing opponents that have similar narratives. And what I'm talking about is that you have 2 teams in LSU and Ole Miss that have played as 2 completely different versions of themselves already this year. Ole Miss, the highly potent offense that blew past South Carolina and physically dominated them this past week. And then the version of them that completely overthought things and played terrible offense and made a bunch of mistakes and gave up a bunch of big chunk plays. And then on the LSU side of things, it was the potent play that they've had in spurts, throwing the football, huge rushing gains that they had, especially against South Carolina. Apparently is the get-right game this year for everybody. But then the weaknesses that you showed up against USC, and also that kind of reappeared against UCLA. The biggest thing for this game, Blake, is which version of those 2 teams shows up in this football game. It's all going to come down to that. And I think if the best version shows up for both teams, it's going to make last year's game look like a snooze fest. I think that this game is going to be ridiculously, comically high scoring if both these teams play to their true potential. They are going to have huge chunk plays because they have shown that capability to do so. And it's all going to come down to, I don't think I really have a pick on this at this current moment, Blake, which is very rare. I usually kind of come into these previews leaning in a certain direction. I think it's going to come down to whoever scores the last touchdown, plain and simple. That's all it's going to be in this game.
I don't think it's going to be high scoring. Can I tell you why?
How come?
The last 2 weeks, Ole Miss is 4 of 23 on third down, 17% completions or conversions on third down. Joe, they've struggled offensively against their last 2 opponents, who, by the way, didn't do much offensively, either one of them, which I'll talk about their defense in just a moment. South Carolina had 3 turnovers last week, 2 that were turnovers on down, and then the fake punt that Shane Beamer, everybody and their mama knew that Shane Beamer was running. Okay, all of those 3 turnovers coming on the side of the field of Ole Miss. Joe, that's how they scored all their points. Very favorable field position. There was only one time that they had a drive, which, by the way, they fumbled with Juice Wells. I'm not going to take the anemic offensive playing by 2 teams in Lenore Sellers and what we've seen from Kentucky and say that this defense isn't good. I'll talk about them in a moment. But, Joe, this is not the offense that everybody thought was going to be there. Their offensive line at moments, their running game at moments has been very bad these last 2 weeks, and that's the best thing that LSU, ironically, has done defensively. Look, they've gone against multiple teams that we've seen that can run the football and stop them. I look, of the 13 touchdowns LSU has given up, Joe, 6 of them have come on explosive running plays. Outside of that, LSU has given up 2.37 yards per carry. I mean, it's not like that they haven't had moments. I think the third down conversion rate and the third downs and the bad ways that they have looked on third down does Ole Miss. Joe, if they can easily correct it against LSU in Tiger Stadium at night, but man, I mean, like, that's got to be a concern.
You know what I think? Now that I'm listening to you talk, I've made a decision. I think I'm going to go with Ole Miss. I think that after everything you just said, which probably bodes well for you, because last year when I picked Missouri to beat LSU, the one time I picked against them, LSU ended up winning. I rewatched, of all games, I rewatched the UCLA game. And I know that LSU in spurts has shown some signs of defensive improvement. But I can't help but show concern still for what I talked about coming into the season, fixing some of the mistakes that they had last 100%. Year. It's something that it takes more than a season. It takes a whole cycle of high school recruiting. It might take one more portal edition in the upcoming year. Not saying that LSU isn't a good team. It's just that there's still a couple of holes for them that haven't really been completely addressed and that are hard to do in a short period of time. Rewatching the UCLA game, parts of it, like UCLA doesn't have anyone special on offense. And it felt like that there were times when they were able to create and UCLA's quarterback was able to extend plays and connect with some pretty wide open receivers. That's what I'm coming off of. I understand what you're talking about there with Ole Miss and that they did benefit from a lot of things. And I keep circling back to that South Carolina was overrated and everybody was hyping them up for no reason. And they're clearly way too young and not as good as anyone would have thought. And they took advantage of that. But they've got juice on offense when they play as good as they can.
They're not going to win.
But I know that they haven't been hitting that the past 2 weeks. But there is a version of that has been at least started to show up more against South Carolina. And
well,
this is a game that they need to win. My final thought is
showing up is because Trey Harris is likely out of this game.
That might be the biggest make or break. And I know it's hard to like really have an answer on that on a Monday.
Well, no, Lane came out there and said if we were playing today, he can't go. I mean, Joe, he missed the rest of the first half after he went down,
right?
And he missed the entire second half. And Lane said today that, we're preparing not to have him this week. Maybe Lane's trolling. I mean, that's what he does. But
right. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Well, that's why they were going to juice. I'm not saying that. Look, listen to what I'm saying. I am not saying that Lane cannot find his offense against anybody. I'm not saying that at all. But I think there's got to come to a point where, Joe, they struggled to run the football with their backs. They've been really hurt and beat up with their backs. Jackson Darnold's had to scramble for his life. He was 8 for 44 last week. He was having to scramble a lot because of the pressure that was generated on him. I'm not saying that LSU is the best defense that they've seen the last 3 weeks. They're not. They're not better than Kentucky on defense. They're not better than South Carolina maybe on defense. We'll see. But there comes a part where I look at this game too. Their defense has been what they've leaned their hat on. That's where they've hung up their coat, is what they've been able to do with J.J. Pegues, who, by the way, also has 4 touchdowns rushing on the year. Yeah. That defensive line, Chris Paul at linebacker, that is what's been dominating for them, has been their defense. They look really good. The opposite side of that in this game, Joe, they haven't seen a quarterback that can stress them defensively like Garrett Nussmeier can throwing the football. And so, look, you have an offense that struggled the last 2 weeks in Ole Miss. Again, they 100% can find themselves. Not saying that they can't find themselves on LSU, but I think that we think of this LSU team's defense like that they were last year. I will remind you, I don't like comparing these, but USC was able to run on Michigan better than they did LSU. They have a better offensive line than Ole Miss. I think that this defense, who, by the way, has climbed 75 spots in total defense, I would not expect, I should say it like that, I'm not expecting for LSU to be like not give up 20 points because they easily can. But, Joe, it's also the other part of, like, what are we going to say about Nussmeier in this offense that also has been moving? He's number one in the SEC in touchdowns, number one in the SEC in completion percentage and yards. I mean, they have not seen a collective team that can test them all around like this, and they have a loss against Kentucky.
And that's fair, and that's understandable for what you're bringing up here, that they haven't faced a quarterback who's been as consistent as Nussmeier. But this is why I come back to, I really think that this game is going to be high scoring. Like, I think that I'm willing to give Ole Miss's offense more credit than you are, because, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, and this is kind of what I've been hinting at this whole time. I think that this is a perfect get-right opportunity for Dart in this offense. I understand that the unavailability of Trey Harris is going to be impactful, but, like, there were spurts that Lenora Sellers, before he went out with his injury, he was dotting things up. He was looking very proficient as a passer against LSU.
I mean, he was below 50%, and no, he wasn't dotting them up. He was running on him. He wasn't dotting them up.
He had a number.
He wasn't dotting them up.
He's a redshirt freshman. I'm saying that for a redshirt freshman, the throws that he was able to convert against LSU, and the way that I don't even know who UCLA's quarterback was in that game.
Garbers.
Yeah, Garbers. Some of the throws, and he's nothing special, and some of the throws that he was able to convert, I would just think that based on that, and you bring up really good points, I think that there's going to be some exposure on Ole Miss's defense and their secondary in this, going up against that receiving core for LSU. I think it's going to be really high scoring. I think that there's so much potential for this. I understand why you have pause for that, but I feel like this game just overall is going to be whoever's the football last will win the game.
It's not going to be like last year, I promise you. Not at night, not in that place. It's not going to happen. Look, there's three things that I know: death, taxes, and no high-scoring games in that place at night. It's not going to happen.
Man, Linda thinks I hate LSU. I don't hate LSU. I've picked you guys. I've picked you guys a million times. I wore that stupid hat for 6 months.
The stupid hat was your fault.
I still wore the hat though, willingly.
Okay. Listen, I am not saying that LSU can't lose. They can lose this football game.
No, I 100% agree.
They can 100% lose this football game. And I know that you're going with Ole Miss here.
I was mostly saying that jokingly. I haven't fully.
No, you're going with Ole Miss. Go with Ole Miss.
But wait, hold on. I'm 51% Ole Miss, 49% LSU. That's how unconfident I am in that pick. It's gonna be a good game. I think it's gonna be a great game, though. This might be the best game of the weekend. I don't know, dude. I can explain it. I just explained it. I think that this is going to be high scoring.
There are parts of both. I'll agree with you on this. There are parts on both teams I just cannot trust. Joe, you can't look at what Ole Miss has done on third down and think, by the way, Jackson Dart went 2 of 8 in the second half throwing the football. Lane admitted today
yes.
They stopped throwing the football because they didn't think that they can complete a pass.
Yeah.
They threw the ball one time, and I know that game was out of hand for what it's worth, but there just comes a point, too, where, like, I know what you're saying about it being high scoring, but there also just comes a part where I don't know if it's like that. I see where you're coming from, but you're going to have to now explain to me that they're facing a better offense and that they have not done good things offensively. Joe, they haven't. They can't run the football effectively outside of Dart. I mean, it's not like Kentucky and South Carolina did anything special against them. Now, do I think that they can run a little bit better on LSU? Possibly.
Yeah.
But it's just not that. Look, because of this picture behind me, I'm going to get labeled a homer, and that's okay. But Ole Miss fans, I dare you to challenge me on what I'm saying to be false. You know what? Don't challenge me. Go listen. Go stop right now if you're watching this clip. Go over to Lane Kiffin's press conference this morning. Joe, it's the same thing. I'm telling you, All right,
All
walk up in here at night and see what's going to happen. You're going to get your ass busted. That's what's going to happen.
Well, we'll find out if that comes to fruition or not.
Last thing. Program defining game for LSU under Brian Kelly happens on Saturday. So we've had it with Lincoln Riley, right? That he has his second loss this season. He's 5-7 in the last 12 games. Billy Napier 5-7 in the last 12 games. He was the only other big transactional coach that moved from place to place. If LSU is who they're going to be, this game will define where they're going to be. I ask you, do you agree on that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think for both these teams, it's program defining.
Lane can afford to lose it because it's still Ole Miss. Brian
well,
Kelly.
And Lane's got other jobs on the line that come in. I mean, like if he loses this game, it's all the more reason for him to jump ship and go somewhere else.
We'll see.
Do you have enough time to squeak in this Colorado one, or should we save it?
Yeah, we can go to. I have my notes here. We can go to Colorado.
All right, let's.
I mean, I don't have AYS at 7. I just got to be out about 7:15 when my Saints go and beat the shit out of the Taylor Swifties. All right,
let's do it.
Kansas State, Colorado, in what is the premier matchup of the weekend. Joe, Colorado coming off a bye, Kansas State coming off a pretty convincing win when we last saw them as well. Your thoughts going into what is, Joe, I'm going to ask you the question, a Big 12 eliminator here to some extent?
I'm going to say no, because I really think that it's going to be a 3-loss team that wins the conference. I'm starting to feel pretty good about that coming to fruition. This game is probably one of the most ridiculous ones that we're ever going to preview this season, because they are polar opposites in so many categories. Colorado's 110th in the country with for most penalties per game with 8, while Kansas State is 28th fewest in penalties per game. Colorado's got one of the best passing offenses, 9th in the country, while Kansas State has one of the worst passing offenses in the country at 108. They've got one of the best rushing offenses in the country with 252 yards, good for 7th in the country, while Colorado is one of the worst at 125th, only averaging 80. All this game is going to come down to, like, and this is when I definitely don't have a pick. I kind of lean Colorado for one reason I'm going to get to in a second. It's going to come down to which strength for either of these teams, which is Kansas State running the football, Colorado throwing the football. Which one overwhelms the opposing team more? I think where the separation point is here is that Shedeur Sanders and how good he's been playing and his ability to, when things are going wrong, he has found ways to resurrect his team. And their offensive line play has been improving gradually, but it's still not great. I don't have anyone necessarily on that Kansas State defensive line that truly sparks fear in me if I'm that Colorado offensive line, but I'm sure that they're going to give up pressures. If this game is tight and it comes down to a drive, I really do think that Shedeur is going to be able to will his team back like we saw him do against Baylor and the way that he played against UCF. He has been phenomenal. I think that that's the separation point. I think that the Nebraska game has been a rallying cry for them, that they've come closer together and they've been more of a team ever since. And then the last, bit here for talking about Colorado is this game's at home for them. And I don't think Colorado gets enough credit for how raucous that stadium has been, since Deion's taken over. And I think that is going to also be a bit of a helping factor for them in this.
Look, I think you're right in this. I do think that Colorado could come into this game and be in a situation where their wide receivers and Shedeur Sanders is able to really put it on them throwing the football. But Joe, I'm more intrigued about the coaching staffs in this one, because what does Deion Sanders and what does Deion Sanders do coming off of a bye? What does he do? What does Kansas State do? So, listen, I think that the players on the field advantage Colorado. I think the coaching staff, however, in this game, advantage Kansas State. And we're going to find out what truly matters in this one. I told you this about Avery Johnson, too, the quarterback. for Kansas State. I don't if they get in a situation where they got to get points and Colorado is putting it on them, Joe, he's not going to be able to throw them back in the game. He was really bad against BYU throwing the football. It's just not his game, man. I think if you're Colorado, you just got to play your game. Styles make matchups. I think yours is a little bit more favorable here, Joe.
And I think one of the pieces of evidence that we can kind of point to, and this is why this game's really hard to predict, in my opinion, is that the two bad games that these teams played, what happened? Colorado against Nebraska, the game got away from them because Nebraska was more physical up front. Yep. They were able to run the football. They controlled time of possession, and they kept the ball out of Colorado's hands. Eventually, they forced some bad turnovers and whatnot. BYU's bad game, the game got away from them.
You mean Kansas State's bad game?
Sorry. Kansas State's bad game against BYU. Game got away from them. They were down too many scores, and that offense is not – it's a great rushing attack. It's one of the best rushing attacks in the country, but it just feels like it's not designed to put up points in spurts to get back into a game. That's where I come down to, and I think that if Colorado goes up by 10, that could be enough for them to just keep enough of a separation between them and Kansas State.
So it sounds like both of us might be going with Colorado here, which kind of sparks me to ask, Joe, if they're 5-1 coming out of this one, what conversations are we having about Colorado?
I mean, that they're good enough to win the Big 12, but they got to finish.
Are they a playoff
season.
contender?
If they win the Big 12, they are. I stand by this. I don't think that more than one Big 12 team gets into the playoff. Like, I really don't. I think the playoff committee.
See that. But they can win the conference, man. I mean, look, if you can beat Kansas State, which, look, man, I'm sure Deion's been putting pressure on them all week in reference to this. And I know that there's a lot on the line. Now you need to show us, are you the team that everybody paints you in the media? Are you the team that can go out in the field and win a P4 conference? Can you do that in year two? Joe, I just think that this passing attack is gonna startle Kansas State. Like I do. They haven't seen these receivers. They haven't seen this type of quarterback. But to your point, if Kansas State can out-physical them, and look, Joe, we've seen the blueprint for this game too. There's a very strong chance that Kansas State can keep the ball away from them too.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. There's a ton of truth to that. And that's how they win, is that they play the Nebraska style. We're going to grind things out. And we're going to run the football. And
Vandium.
The way that if the version of Kansas State where they smoked Oklahoma State comes out, I think they win pretty handedly. But the difference between Oklahoma State and Colorado, much better player at quarterback, much better players at receiver.
Right.
If they can will their way back into it if they go down a few scores. And if maybe they have a bad first quarter, they're capable of dragging themselves, out of that and surviving.
Yeah, you just got to play the time of possession game. You got to keep Shedeur off the field. If you can do that, Joe, I think that they can win this game. And look, I'm going to go Colorado here. I'm pretty confident in them going into this one. The only thing that scares me is if, I think that one side does have the better staff here. That's what I'd say. All right. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, tomorrow we got 4 more games that we'll be dropping on the channel.
Go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, notification bell. All I'm going to say is this: the Swifties are going down tonight. Who that, baby? Who that? We'll see y'all on Wednesday, but we'll see you on more with Tuesday. We'll see y'all soon. Peace.